The Elixir of Life by Vera Ivanovna Kryzhanovskaia. Instead of a foreword, more than half a century ago, many readers were captivated by the occult novels of Vera Kryzhanovskaia. Later, in deference to communist ideology, these works, like many other books, were banned and consigned to oblivion. Today, however, the writings of Vera Kryzhanovskaia are once again being offered to readers' attention. Not everything in her literary legacy is beyond dispute or of equal merit, but we hope that the reader will be able to discern the grain from the chaff. Critically evaluating the work of this once famous novelist, Helena Ivanovna Rurik wrote, "After all, Kryzhanovskaia's books have done their good deed. Alongside a fair amount of banality, they contain true pearls." Letters of Helena Rurik, 1940, Volume 1, page 338. And further, undoubtedly she, Vera Kryzhanovskaia, is worthy of respect, for her books have brought their benefit. It is equally undeniable that her series The Magi is incomparably more talented and richer in accurate information than the works of many later novelists who write on occult themes. Volume 2, page 134. I am not opposed, continues Helena Rurik, to the reading of Kryzhanovskaia, Saint Eve Delvedra, and in general works of such a kind. Many minds need an enticing element of fantasy in order to be ignited. There is nothing belittling in this. They cannot be satisfied with dull everydayness and instinctively sense that somewhere or another, more beautiful reality exists. Therefore, they are drawn to anything extraordinary. And they are right, for there is indeed a reality that surpasses human imagination. Yet it is so far removed from our limited earthly concepts that no fantasy can fully encompass it. But in seeking the unusual and the fantastical, we must not stray from the firm foundation of true beauty. Alas, the tragedy lies in the fact that most people still equate beauty with the ostentation and guilt of luxury, with the appalling vulgarity and poverty of thought. Volume 2, page 370. As the ENIO publishing house undertook the reissue of Vera Kryzhanovskaia's novels, it proceeded from the very idea that many minds need an enticing element of fantasy in order to be ignited. The series of novels includes 5 books: The Elixir of Life, The Magi, The Wrath of God, The Death of a Planet, and The Lawgivers, which will be published in 3 volumes. Chapter 1. In one of the districts of London far removed from the center, stood an old, yet still sturdy house, adjoining an expansive garden. On the 3rd floor of this house, dating back to the time of Cromwell and preserving the stern and Puritan appearance of that era, lived Dr. Ralph Morgan, as stated on a brass plaque affixed to the blackened oak door. His apartment consisted of an anteroom, a dining room, a study, and a bedroom. All the rooms were furnished very simply yet comfortably, and possessed one priceless advantage for any tenant. Their windows looked out onto the garden. The doctor loved silence and greenery and preferred a long walk, even in foul weather, to life in the noisy city center with its clatter, bustle, and dreary view of rooftops and countless chimneys. It was a wonderful August night, so quiet and warm that the window in the doctor's study stood open. At a large writing desk sat the master of the apartment himself, reading by the light of a lamp with a green shade a thick book in a worn binding. Dr. Morgan was a young man of about 30. He might even have been considered handsome, were it not for the terrible thinness and unhealthy pallor that marred him. He was tall and well-built, thick, golden chestnut hair and a short beard, slightly darker, framed his fine, classically shaped face. His large eyes, grave and thoughtful, were of an indeterminate color. In moments of calm, they were grayish-blue, but darkened at the slightest agitation. His gaze was remarkably mobile, reflecting every inner movement of his soul. The furnishings of the study indicated that Ralph was a scholarly and industrious man. A vast library and numerous shelves were heaped with books, journals, and bundles of pamphlets, not only on medicine, but on all branches of human knowledge. The doctor could freely bury himself in books and devote himself to his studies, for he had almost no patience. His livelihood came from the well-paid position he held at a major psychiatric hospital. Ralph was content with this situation, all the more because his frail health compelled him to lead a quiet and orderly life. But if he had few duties as a physician, his inquisitive mind worked all the more relentlessly. After all, he confronted daily the inexplicable problem of madness. His constant contact with this elusive evil, which still defies scientific investigation and yet undermines human health, drove the doctor to seek a solution to the mystery. But in vain he leafed through the works of practical science and delved into the writings of mystics and alchemists. Neither the research of the most learned psychiatrists nor the obscure formulas of Paracelsus yielded him the key. Everywhere, as if through a fog, he perceived something undefined. He sensed laws that must surely exist, yet the mechanism behind them lay shrouded in darkness, and he was powerless to dispel it. One thing, however, he considered certain, that there existed an invisible current, an astral radiation maintaining the exchange of vital forces among all living beings and exerting decisive and powerful influence on their organisms. But how these invisible forces acted and what laws governed them remained a mystery. And the doctor was bitterly aware that even those who styled themselves scholars in these matters stood as helplessly blind before this gravest affliction of humanity, mental derangement. Madness remained that unknown and unexplored realm that irresistibly drew the young physician, who yearned with all his soul to ease the fate of mankind. At times, after fruitless efforts to unravel the riddle that forever slipped from his grasp, anger seized him. Anger at those cruel laws veiled in secrecy, hiding the means that must surely exist to relieve the maladies of the soul. So many scientists had devoted their entire lives to these questions, and yet in the field of mental illness, so little had been achieved. Magnetism and hypnotism provided help at times, but seemingly only by chance. More than once, Ralph asked himself why human life so often seemed a continuous heavy agony. The precious breath that animates a person seems to vanish without a trace, while the rest rots in the earth. The purpose for which millions are born and die, struggling, suffering, striving toward an unknown goal, remains obscure, and death sweeps them from the face of the earth like useless dust. Pushing aside the book on hypnotism he had been reading, the doctor rose, went to the window, and gazed thoughtfully at the star-studded sky. Like a fabric of diamonds, the sky stretched out with its Milky Way fading into a shimmering mist. World after world, system after system, infinity teems with myriads of colossal worlds, yet somehow there seems not enough space. Undoubtedly, as on Earth, death reaps humanity there too, which like field grass, greens in spring and withers in autumn, turning to dust after fulfilling its purpose. Could the same be true of the human soul, a conscious and powerful psychic spark? Is it truly so insignificant that, flashing like a wandering light over a green marsh, is extinguished forever without past or future? By chance he glanced at his own hand, still holding the ivory paper knife, and shuddered. Soon, perhaps, this very hand would lie cold and rigid upon his lifeless chest. Take care of yourself, my young friend, his old professor, his former teacher, had told him several weeks earlier. Your heart is unhealthy and your lungs are damaged. You need complete physical and mental rest. Otherwise, Ralph sighed heavily, fully understanding what that otherwise meant. As a doctor, he knew all too well what sharp chest pains, irregular heartbeat that stole his breath, weakness, and a dry cough that brought drops of blood to his lips foretold. He shut the window, sank back into his chair, and closed his eyes. A sudden fear of death overwhelmed him. It was easy for the professor to say, "Take care of yourself. Rest your mind." Such rest could be prescribed only for those who do not think and are absorbed in worldly bustle. But for one whose mind toils, whose intellect seeks truth and constantly collides with doubt and conjecture, such rest is impossible. And what is death? That icy, annihilating breath that lurks around every corner, steals loved ones, familiar surroundings, acquired knowledge, and casts one into the unknown void. The living honor the memory of the dead with statues or prayers. But what of the dead themselves? Do they know of these tributes? Do they feel, suffer, or continue to love those who remain alive? Many strange phenomena speak of an otherworldly existence, yet nothing proves it scientifically. Such manifestations cannot be summoned at will, governed as they are by unknown laws as obscure as the world they rule. Ralph wiped his damp forehead and pressed his hand to his throbbing heart. How many times he had wrestled painfully with that terrible doubt. To be or not to be? Often he asked himself, why do those who left this world earlier not return to enlighten those they love? If such a thing were possible? A few years earlier, he had lost his mother, whom he had adored. She too had lived and breathed only for him. Yet she remained deaf to his desperate plea, giving no sign as to whether she had survived death or still loved him as before. A sharp pain in his chest and a fit of choking cough made him painfully aware of how close he himself was to that dreadful mystery called death. Anguish and fear before the approaching void gripped his heart even more tightly. Could there truly be no means to prolong life and halt the destruction of the body? He suddenly remembered reading in a book on occultism about a life elixir, the secret of which had been lost. Though alchemists had sought it in vain in the entrails or blood of young girls, children, and animals, in plants, and in the atmosphere. And yet magical books spoke of this elixir as an unquestionable fact. Oh, if only it could be found, for it undoubtedly existed, a vital fluid, a mighty force that worked within organic bodies and every living creature. This elusive breath of life must be everywhere, in primitive organisms as well as the most complex. A sharp, insistent ringing of the bell shattered the doctor's stormy thoughts. He straightened and listened, but old Patrick, his only servant, must have been sleeping like the dead, for all was quiet in the hall. A moment later the bell rang again. Ralph rose. Someone in the neighborhood was likely ill and had sent for him. Such events, though rare, did occur. Since Patrick gave no sign of waking, the young man opened the door himself. On the staircase stood a tall man wrapped in a dark cloak, a wide-brimmed felt hat on his head. In his hands, he held a silver-mounted casket. "Have I the honor of speaking with Dr. Morgan?" the stranger asked in a deep, resonant voice. "Yes, that is I, at your service." "In that case, allow me to come in. I must speak with you about a matter of great importance, one that concerns you deeply." The stranger laid his cloak and hat on a chair and followed Ralph into his study. Both men sat down, and a fairly long silence ensued. Ralph regarded his guest with curiosity. The man appeared to be about 35 or 40 years old. Though he seemed strong and healthy, he was at that moment very pale and evidently fatigued. Yet despite this, not a single wrinkle marred his broad forehead, and not a gray hair glimmered in his thick, raven-black hair. His face bore the purest Greek type, and might well have served as a model for a statue by Phidias. The stranger's contemplative gaze rested on the books cluttering the desk, before lifting to Ralph with his large, dark, velvety eyes. "You're searching for the elixir of life and wish to possess it. Who are you, that you should know my thoughts?" muttered Ralph, springing from his chair. The mysterious visitor smiled. "Sit and fear nothing," he said. "I am by no means the devil, as I am sure you suspect. I am as human as you are. The only difference between us is that you wish to live and I wish to die. You have lived too little, I too much, and now I desire to return to the void. I have come to offer you an exchange. You hold death, I hold life. Give me a little of your blood, and I shall give you drops of the elixir. Do you consent?" The doctor stared at him anxiously. Clearly, before him stood a patient of his specialty. But before he could comprehend how to act, the strange visitor laughed, a loud and open laugh that left Ralph utterly bewildered. "You deem me mad and are considering how to deal with me to rid yourself of this inconvenient visit," the stranger said kindly. "Calm yourself, my young friend. I am in full possession of my faculties. Incredible as it may seem, what I have said is absolute truth. I do indeed possess the elixir of life. Now let us speak seriously. For a long time, I have sought a person worthy of inheriting my knowledge and the secret of my life, yet all my searches were in vain. Fate brought me to you. I have studied your life, your character, your ambitions. I know your doubts and the thirst for knowledge that torments you. From this, I concluded that you are more capable than anyone else of receiving my legacy. Tell me honestly, do you wish to live forever?" The young doctor flushed and straightened up. "Certainly I do, yet I doubt that you could grant me what you promise. What glory would you gain if you truly possessed a means to keep humanity upon the earth? Why do you think that, possessing the secret of long life, I would wish to use it to suspend the operation of a wise, beneficial law and burden the planet with millions of unnecessary people? Benefactors of humanity are rare indeed, and it is highly doubtful that they would wish to employ my means. Now, here are my conditions. I want you to give me a little of your blood, already imbued with the fluid of decay. Being a doctor yourself, you know that you are condemned to death. The state of your heart and lungs admits no ordinary cure. In exchange for this blood, which will allow me to die, I shall give you the elixir of life. One drop into a sufficiently large vial will suffice to heal you and grant you quasi-eternal life. As for the rest of the elixir, never touch it. Guard your secret carefully, and resist the temptation to populate the earth with immortal men. The temptation will be great, but your duty is to resist. One more word. If I grant you the elixir, I also bequeath to you my knowledge, my estate, and my name. Now decide, do you wish to be my heir? I give you 10 minutes to consider." Ralph was overwhelmed. Thoughts whirled through his mind like a tempest, causing him acute pain. The intensity of his excitement stole his breath. Suddenly, he met the stranger's intelligent and energetic gaze, and his composure and resolve returned. "I agree. Dispose of me as you will," he said, rising and extending his hand to the stranger. The visitor shook it and stood. "In that case, you must leave with me at once." "For long?" "That will depend on circumstances. Most likely for several weeks. Then I request a quarter of an hour to prepare and inform my servant that I am departing on matters of inheritance. By all means, I shall wait for you on the stairs." In a single moment, Ralph packed some clothes and a few garments into his small suitcase. Then he awoke Patrick, gave him instructions, and handed him money for expenses. Tucking a miniature of his late mother into his pocket, he stepped out to join the stranger. They descended the stairs in silence, seated themselves in a waiting carriage, and proceeded directly to the station, where they boarded the train bound for Dover. The stranger occupied a separate compartment, and once the train was underway, offered Ralph dinner. The young man, however, was too agitated to feel any appetite. Yet his companion jested cheerfully as he unpacked a basket of the finest delicacies brought by his small, sturdy servant. Ralph calmed, ate, drank exquisite wine, and at last ventured to ask their destination. To the continent, and thence you shall see, replied the stranger with a faint smile. The journey lasted several days. They paused only as long as necessary for trains or steamers. Yet the accommodations were so comfortable that, despite his frail condition, Ralph felt no fatigue. He now knew they were traveling to Switzerland, to the canton of Valais. Upon arrival, they stopped in a secluded village at the foot of Monte Rosa, and the mysterious companion announced that they would ascend the mountain the next day. Ralph was surprised, but said nothing. Having dared to embark on this adventure, he resolved to see it through. The following day, dressed appropriately and armed with alpine sticks, the two travelers set out. As they climbed to the first heights and the air grew chill, the stranger remarked with a smile, "We shall have to spend the night on the glaciers. Are you afraid of the cold, my young friend?" Ralph shrugged. "I hope to endure it, as any man would. After all, since the decay of my body has begun, does it matter if it ends slightly sooner or later? Besides, if you're not a patient of my profession and truly require my life, you will not let me die. Your courage and stoicism please me. You are right. I value your life, and to spare you undue fatigue, I offer you this box of lozenges. Suck these candies along the way. You will feel neither cold nor weariness." Seeing Ralph hesitate, he added with gentle irony, "Take them freely. These candies contain no life elixir yet. They are merely a stimulant to strengthen you." They continued their ascent, though the path grew ever more arduous and they reached the snow line. The stranger seemed entirely unaffected. Even Ralph marveled at his own strength and the invigorating warmth coursing through his veins. They spent the night in an empty hut, and with the first rays of dawn, resumed their climb. How long they traveled, Ralph could not say. They crossed glaciers, skirted chasms, and climbed near vertical heights. It was clear they had strayed from the usual tourist path, venturing deep into an unexplored part of the snowy wilderness. The stranger moved with a confidence revealing complete knowledge of the route. Rounding one of the jagged peaks, they reached a small, bare rocky plateau with terraced drops on one side, as if deliberately carved by human hands. At the end of this perilous descent, they entered a glacier, and after 4 hours' walk approached the entrance to a large grotto, illuminated by a bluish light. With mingled curiosity and apprehension, Ralph followed his guide into the grotto, and was astonished to see, behind a massive block of ice, a door, or rather, a stone slab. The slab turned silently on hidden hinges when the stranger pressed a faintly glowing point concealed in a crevice. Now they found themselves in a narrow corridor cut into the rock. The moment the stranger pressed a button set into the wall, the corridor was brightly illuminated by electric light. "You have electricity here?" muttered Ralph, incredulous. "My dear fellow, why should we not use modern inventions to furnish comfortably the main apartment of the Elixir of Life, since we are in the very location of this precious substance and its adepts," replied the stranger with a playful smile. At the end of the corridor was a spiral staircase, which led to a landing where several doors opened. The stranger opened one, and they emerged onto a broad rocky terrace. From here, a wondrous view unfolded, and Ralph gave an involuntary cry of delight. From this dizzying height, like a giant painting, a magical landscape stretched before them. Cliffs, snowy plains, and deep ravines seemed to sink into the purple mist of the setting sun. Far below, in the valleys, fields and meadows gleamed like enormous emeralds. The air, though cold, was pure and life-giving. Ralph felt he had never before been so alive, that the earth had never seemed so beautiful, nor life so desirable as at that moment. The stranger crossed his arms on his chest and gazed at the scene with a sad and contemplative expression. After a moment, he ran a hand over his brow as if brushing away troubling thoughts and said, turning to Ralph, "Let us go. We must refresh ourselves and then discuss the matter at hand." They retraced their steps, showing the doctor the exit mechanism. The stranger opened the opposite door and led him into a medium-sized circular hall. A bright fire blazed in the fireplace, and the room was pleasantly warm. Ralph looked about with curiosity. The walls were entirely draped in heavy, dark oriental fabric. A thick carpet covered the floor. Along one wall stood what appeared to be a sideboard or cupboard with carved doors. Opposite, a large desk was piled with books and scrolls. Several antique chairs, inlaid with gold and ivory, occupied the room, and in the center a table was set for two with a massive golden candelabrum. The stranger placed the casket on a chair and lit the candles. Then he retrieved several bottles of wine from the cupboard, a large pie, fruit, and invited his guests to sit at the table. The unusual journey had whetted Ralph's appetite. When they had eaten their fill, the stranger moved his chair to the hearth and invited his guests to follow suit. "The time has come to speak seriously and in detail about the matter that brought us here. Several centuries ago, I sat in the very chair you now occupy, listening with the same anxiety and agitation to the account of the life of my predecessor in possession of the great secret I now entrust to you. Now hear the story of my past, as I once heard the life story of the one who brought me here. My official name is Narayana Supramati, an Indian prince. This name, along with all documents confirming it and all privileges attached, I received from the one who bequeathed to me the Elixir of Life. My true name, however, is Archelaus. I was born in Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy Lagus, who inherited Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. My father, Clonius, served in the army under the command of the Lagid and bound his fate to that of his sovereign. Having become master of Egypt, Ptolemy generously rewarded my father and granted him a significant position at court. I grew up in luxury. Being an only child, my parents indulged me excessively, and I led a careless life devoted entirely to pleasure. At the age of 20, I lost my father, bereft of guidance. I committed such follies and led such a disordered life that within 5 years I had squandered my fortune, and one fine morning awoke sick and penniless. My reckless living had drained both body and purse. The time of bitter trials arrived. All the friends who once crowded my feasts, all the women who vied for my favor, and even the parasites who fed on my generosity had abandoned me. I was left alone, without a penny in my pocket, and would have surely perished from poverty and disease had I not been taken in by a poor man, a former soldier who had served under my father. He tended to me, When I recovered enough to walk, we left Alexandria and traveled to a small estate inherited by Marion, as my protector was called. There awaited us a new disappointment. A patch of land on the edge of the desert could barely sustain us, and the house was no more than a half-ruined hut. Yet Marion would not return to Alexandria. He was a silent, misanthropic man, shunning humanity. Like me, he was bitter and had suffered enough from human ingratitude and treachery. I made no objection when he chose for our dwelling a neighboring grotto and began laboring alongside him for the scant sustenance it afforded. The fresh air and toil restored my health, and for a time I lost myself in this new life. I reflected on my past and judged myself harshly for the unforgivable folly that had reduced me to poverty and pariah status. Nevertheless, as long as my old guardian lived, I bore this life patiently. I had grown accustomed to work. Evenings were spent conversing by the grotto. The old soldier told me of Alexander's wars and recounted thousands of curious incidents from his campaigns in India and Persia. In these stories, I forgot my present misery and lived through that glorious past. For years later, Marion died, and I was left alone. Gradually, solitude became burdensome, then intolerable. I began to yearn for my former life, the luxury and comfort that had once surrounded me, the refined and enlightened society, and felt an irresistible pull toward the ungrateful world from which I had been forever exiled. Bitter despair took hold. Day by day, the reality of my existence grew increasingly hateful, and the desire to return to worldly life grew stronger. Yet this desire was unattainable. I had nothing but the cave, converted by Marion into a wretched den. In the same tattered garments, I would have been driven from the thresholds of the palaces where my former Alexandrian friends dwelled. As for returning to the capital to seek employment, there was nothing to think of, for I knew nothing and could earn no bread. More than a year passed in this cruel inner struggle. My despair reached its zenith. I had developed a complete aversion to life and was already contemplating ending such existence. One night, I lay at the entrance of the grotto, lost in dark thoughts, when I suddenly heard approaching footsteps. At first, I thought it was a young shepherd who sometimes brought me something from the neighboring village. But when an unfamiliar voice called my name, I sprang to my feet in astonishment. Before me stood a tall man, wrapped in a dark cloak, with a strikingly energetic and expressive face. "You wish to die, Archelaus, to escape this wretched, miserable life you drag through this desert," he said in a resonant voice, fixing me with a burning gaze. "Though you deserve your fate, being the author of your own misfortune, I have taken pity on you. If you wish, I will take you with me to a place where you shall be shielded from poverty and live as long as you desire." From all these words, I understood only that I was being offered release from this terrible desert where I was rotting alive. I leapt up. "Who are you, generous stranger, come to snatch me from my misery?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I shall gladly follow you, for I am spent and can no longer endure this desert. But how can I follow you in these rags, with bare feet and unkempt beard? Who I am, you shall know in due time. As for the rest, worry not," replied the stranger. He produced from beneath his cloak a bundle, which he handed to me, and a basket which he placed on the ground. "In this bundle you will find clothing and scissors to trim your hair and beard. Go, wash yourself in the spring, and return quickly. I did not need be told twice." Grasping the bundle, I ran to the spring, bathed, and cut my hair and beard. Then I donned purple garments, leather boots, and surveyed myself in the mirror there, along with a dark cloak, felt hat, and a vial of aromatic oil. Pleased with my appearance, reminiscent of former times, I returned to the stranger, who sat at the entrance on a large stone, unpacking the basket and producing a jug of wine and cold meat. The stranger examined me from head to foot and smiled. Now you resemble a man again, and I see you are not averse to leaving these parts quickly. Oh, how I wish to be far from here, I exclaimed, breathing deeply. Time permits, said my protector with a peculiar expression. Let's eat and drink and then set forth. I enjoyed a fine piece of venison and a cup of aged wine. Then we set off. A short distance from the grotto awaited two magnificent steeds, held by a small, hunchbacked servant, much like the one who accompanied us. We arrived in Alexandria. Though my pocket contained a full purse, my protector would not allow me to see any of my former friends. That very evening, we boarded a ship bound for Europe. I shall omit the details of our journey. Suffice it to say that my companion brought me precisely here. From the cliff's esplanade, I beheld the same landscape you admired, barely altered since that time. Then we entered this very room in which we now sit. Here, too, almost nothing has changed. The same draperies, seemingly woven of indestructible fabric, cover the walls. The same chairs remain. Of the alterations and improvements I have made, there is little to speak. Seated, as we are now, I listen to the story of my predecessor's life as you now listen to mine, and then he showed me what I shall now show you. Narayana rose and, with Ralph, approached a cabinet, sliding it aside. Behind it was an iron-carved panel, in the center inlaid with a Kabbalistic figure set with precious stones. Explaining to the doctor how to engage a spring, Narayana opened the frame, revealing an extensive cupboard filled with boxes and compartments of all sizes. At its center lay something resembling a metallic cushion, upon which rested a dark casket, its lid seeming fused with flame. Narayana lifted the casket, carried it to the table, and opened it. Inside, it was lined with a fabric of a blue hue Ralph had never before seen. Upon this extraordinarily delicate background lay two crystal vials with golden stoppers, a tiny golden spoon, and a round box, seemingly made of ivory. The young doctor regarded the contents with a mixture of curiosity and superstitious fear, gazing at the vials containing one of the greatest secrets. Here, said Narayana, is the elixir of life. Who first discovered it? Who extracted this dreadful substance from the chaos of the cosmos? I do not know. The one who initiated me said he had obtained this secret in the same way. I now pass it to you. Nevertheless, I shall recount what is said of it, without vouching for accuracy, for here are only secrets, and even all properties of the elixir of life remain unexplored for fear of handling this perilous substance. It is said to be a gas, possessing the power to balance the elements and to separate them. Yet, by some unknown law, this same substance, when introduced into the body, grants the ability to resist decay. Another tradition states that, in the heart of the earth, guarded by 4 sentinels, this substance springs forth in a fiery fountain, and a profane intruder, venturing there by chance, stole some of this mysterious liquid. How he accomplished it, whether by chemical means to create this liquid fire that fills the vials and the powder in the box, is unknown. I can only instruct you in the proper use of these ingredients. Narayana opened the box of white powder and pointed to the tiny golden spoon. If you take a spoonful of liquid fire from the vials and a pinhead of this powder. Mixing them, both substances upon contact with air, will turn into a colorless, water-like liquid sufficient to grant immortality to several hundred people. There is no need for you to prepare it yourself, as the liquid, prepared by one of my predecessors, will suffice for you and a whole line of your heirs. I shall pass this liquid to you later. I must add that, according to tradition, this powder contains the essence of the four visible elements: air, fire, water, and earth. Once united with the elixir of life, the elements hold no sway over the body imbued with it. Neither water, nor fire, nor storm, nor any force can harm you. Your body shall become indestructible, yet to live too long is inconvenient. And as you see, I have ultimately come to desire death. So, tell me, do you wish to receive from me this elixir of life, longed for by you, and accept all the responsibilities associated with this mysterious gift? Ralph pressed his hands to his head. Everything you say is so strange that my mind cannot orient itself so quickly, he murmured. Calm yourself. I understand your agitation, for I have once experienced it. Yet I must add a few necessary details, so that you may comprehend both the advantages and the perils of a life measured in centuries as you measure years. First, the physical aspect. You shall never fall ill. Neither fatigue, cold, nor heat will affect you. You will sleep out of habit and sleep well, yet you may just as easily go without sleep. You will feel hunger, or rather a pleasant appetite, but in extremis, you may survive long without food. The mysterious elixir bestows unknown powers upon both body and soul. You shall become clairvoyant, perceiving what is hidden to other mortals, and by a single touch, heal various ailments. Poison, bullets, fire, and all excesses shall hold no terror. In short, your body shall become indestructible. Yet it is exceedingly difficult to liberate the soul from this corporeal prison. Now, I turn to your social position. Narayana took the small casket he had brought with him and pulled out a bundle of papers. Here are the documents proving the legitimacy of the name and possessions of Prince Narayana Supramati. And this is my will, notarized by an English notary in Calcutta, by which I bequeath to my younger brother, who bears, like me, the name Narayana Supramati, all my estates, the list of which is attached here, as well as 100 million lying in banks of the old and new world. However, all this is only fragments of the boundless wealth possessed by the owner of the Elixir of Life. Look at these caskets. Narayana returned to the cabinet and opened several of them. All are filled with diamonds, pearls, rubies, emeralds, and other precious stones, each of which represents a fortune. And here, he pressed a button, opening an adjacent compartment, wide and round like a well, lie ingots of pure gold. How deep this gold-bearing well goes, I do not positively know. Perhaps it reaches to the foot of the mountain. In any case, this treasury is inexhaustible and allows one to live like a king. Now, let us consider the other side of the coin. Having enjoyed all the benefits that boundless wealth provides, satisfied one's vanity through revenge and the baseness of people who grovel before gold, and finally having tasted vice and love in all forms, a man falls into a terrible sickness accompanying the precious gift of immortality, satiety. He is seized by an irresistible desire to flee from this clamor, from all amusements and social emptiness, and to hide from human deceit and greed. Having seen everything and experienced everything, the soul grows weary in this tireless body. It begins to feel an urgent need for solitude and silence, and is seized by a painful thirst for freedom. But to understand this, one must experience it oneself. When such moments of despair, bitterness, and moral spiritual fatigue came upon me, I fled to one of my remote castles or to a secluded refuge in the Himalayas. There, completely alone except for a few necessary servants, I sought oblivion and solace in work and sleep. But sleep, the friend and comforter of the poor and destitute, could no longer calm me or silence the oppressive disharmony between my sick soul and eternally healthy body. Work was still the better means, and I eagerly sought truth in all forms. But it is hard to find, even with the strange and mysterious power with which I was imbued. Especially, I studied this devilish substance, full of temptation, like a cup of intoxicating wine whose bitterness is felt only by the one who drains it to the bottom. And yet, despite all my studies, I still know nothing. I searched through all books of magic and hermetic science, but all was in vain. Alchemists sought the elixir of life in vain, and I, having it in my hands, could not analyze it. I had dark hours when I knocked on the gates of hell and summoned its inhabitants. The thirst for life and pleasures attracted them. They appeared and begged me to give them at least a drop of this liquid so they could take on a corporeal form. And did you give it to these unclean beings? Murmured Ralph, dizzy from all he had heard. Narayana shook his head. How could you think that? No, I remained unyielding, for I always feared to touch the unknown and terrible laws carelessly. But I summoned not only unclean beings, I also called forth pure, almost divine spirits. Radiant, they appeared to me dimly and spoke of faith and prayer. I had forgotten how to pray, and what could I ask of the deity? I was immortal and no danger or disease threatened me. I enjoyed inexhaustible wealth, and centuries, like armor, had clothed my soul in indifference. Only satiety tormented me. I hid in the most remote of my castles only to rekindle the taste for life among people. Is it so hard to live without sorrow and disappointment, never feeling the abyss of non-existence beneath your feet? Murmured the doctor. Narayana let out a dry, ringing laugh. You have not yet understood the full tragicomedy of the situation. The elixir of life preserves the integrity of the body and develops the hidden abilities of the soul, but it does not make invulnerable that which thinks and lives within us. Beneath the cortex, created by exceptional circumstances, the soul trembles and sometimes awakens painfully. Not long ago, I experienced love, a love I thought myself incapable of and which consumes the entire being. And then the woman I adored, and on whom I wished to marry, caught a cold and fell ill. The illness seemed harmless to me, but suddenly her condition worsened, and within a few hours my beloved woman died in my arms. Understand well, she died, and in my hands was the elixir of life. These words contained such rage and despair that Ralph shuddered and simultaneously asked himself why Narayana had not used the powerful means he held. He seemed to hear his thought and said with bitter irony, "Because despite everything, I remained human and a slave of fate. I had no time to fetch the liquid, so precious to me at the time, since as a principle I never carried this dangerous substance with me. Oh, then I was like a madman, longing to die. Perhaps I should not have told you all this, but I consider it my duty to reveal to you all the good and bad aspects of what I offer you." A long silence ensued. Pale, with a feverish gaze, Ralph silently looked first at the gathered treasures, then at the dreadful liquid. Try to calm yourself and consider everything freely. I do not demand an immediate answer. You have every right to require time to mature your thoughts and weigh all the pros and cons of my proposal. He rose, put everything back in place, and locked the cabinet. Then, turning to Ralph, he said, "Let us go. For entertainment, I will show you the Hall of Ancestors, the resting place of my predecessors." Narayana drew aside the drapery and opened the door. They again found themselves in a narrow corridor carved in the rock. After 20 steps, they turned right, and the doctor, with inexpressible astonishment, saw that the continuation of the gallery had been pierced through ice. In this icy gallery, tall tripods of ice stood here and there, on which some substance burned, emitting dazzling light but apparently no heat. From the bluish, crystal-clear walls emanated icy cold, and Ralph followed his strange guide, seized by an unpleasant shiver. After several minutes of walking, they entered a vast grotto, lit like the gallery and having a magical, fantastical appearance. Ralph's attention was immediately drawn to a row of sarcophagi, artistically carved from ice, of which only a few contained bodies. With a trembling heart, Ralph began examining the remains of these people who had lived outside the usual laws of nature, among whom he could, if he wished, count himself. They were all beautiful men in the prime of life, seemingly peacefully asleep in their icy tombs. All were dressed alike in long, wide white tunics, and on their heads were wreaths of white phosphorescent flowers, fresh as if just plucked. Narayana approached one resting in peaceful slumber and cast a dark, thoughtful gaze upon him. Then, turning to the doctor, he pointed to an empty sarcophagus and said with an indescribable expression, "My place is next to the one who initiated me, and there, further, yours when you wish to put an end to your long life's wandering." Ralph looked at him inquisitively. "After all, you are not immortal, and your body is destructible, since you can die," he noted. Narayana smiled. "Yes, I can die, if I can seize the true moment favorable for my decomposition. I must tell you, after a certain period, the astral body weakens. It is not the flesh that wears, but the bonds connecting the soul to its material shell. Look at these bodies lying as if alive. Neither time nor decay has touched them. They are indestructible. Only the immortal guest, the divine psychic spark, has departed. Understand me well. If I seize this moment and take the elixir of life a second time, mixed with another's life, fluid already in a state of decay, I will burn the bonds tying my soul. In you, Morgan, the mysterious process of separating the astral from the material shell is already taking place. Forces are already divided into two camps, one to ascend, the other to descend into the great laboratory, chemically reprocessed there, and serve for new combinations. All that consists of air and iron ascends, and that of water and earth decays. Thus, if I introduce this struggle into the bonds connecting me to the body, they will break and I will be free. And I too, in case of need, can use this means to free myself? Without doubt, if you can seize the right moment, but not before several centuries. However, do not think it is easy to die after living so long. And yet, what would become of a man if he had no hope of final liberation? Guard this mysterious liquid well. If you lose it or it is stolen, you lose the chance to die. And now, let us return. Walking through the icy corridor, Ralph again felt a shiver run through his body. He was chilled to the bone and a terrible weakness gripped his limbs. He assumed it was the fatigue and excitement of recent days. Returning to the round hall, he drank a goblet of wine and felt it strengthen him. Then he asked Narayana for permission to rest a little, feeling so exhausted that he was completely incapable of thinking or making any decision. Narayana immediately led his guest to a small room, also carved into the rock and luxuriously furnished. A bright fire blazed in the fireplace, spreading pleasant warmth, but Ralph continued to shiver. Without even undressing, he threw himself onto the sofa, wrapped himself in a thick wool blanket, and soon fell into a heavy, feverish sleep. When Ralph awoke, he felt very unwell. A terrible fever alternated with icy shivers. His limbs were heavy, and his chest felt as if pierced by blazing blades. As a doctor, Ralph immediately understood that he had caught a chill in the glaciers and that a dangerous inflammation of the lungs had begun. He tried to rise, but lacked the strength and bitterly fell back onto the sofa. A few steps from a mysterious elixir, he would die alone in this grotto hidden from mankind. Shortly thereafter, Narayana arrived. Examining the sick man, he shook his head and said with sympathy, "I placed too much hope in your strength. You caught a chill, which hastened, though inevitably, your end. You now stand on a narrow path leading to the other world. The elixir might still save you, but I understand that in your state, you may not wish to use it. My friend, do me a favor, and before you die, give a little of your blood so that I may use it for my own liberation." Ralph extended his hand to him with a weak smile. "Take it," he whispered. Narayana rolled up his shirt sleeve, took a vial from his pocket, and made a small incision on the skin with a lancet. Blood spurted. He carefully collected it in the vial and then, with the skill of an experienced surgeon, bandaged the cut. "Thank you and farewell," he said, firmly shaking Ralph's burning hand. Or rather, goodbye in that world. He nodded and headed for the door. Ralph called after him in a strained voice, "Leave me a little of your elixir in case death frightens me greatly," he murmured, ashamed yet fervently wishing it. A strange smile passed over Narayana's beautiful and stern face. "Very well, I shall bring it now," he replied. A minute later, he returned with a small casket, which he silently opened. Inside were two vials, one larger, the other smaller. Narayana took a crystal goblet and poured a little liquid from the larger vial into it. Raising the goblet to the light, he showed the doctor that at its bottom lay a substance resembling liquid fire. "Here," he said, placing the goblet on the table and carefully covering it with a glass plate. "If you drink this, you will take possession here of the entire inheritance. This vial contains the elixir, already ready for use. Farewell." Taking the small vial from the casket, Narayana bowed and departed. The doctor was left alone. Fixing his gaze on the goblet containing life, he continued to lie there, unable to summon the courage to touch it. Meanwhile, his condition worsened hour by hour. He burned as if in fire. Sharp pain tore his chest, breathing was difficult, and for moments it seemed he was suffocating. Despite the life-giving drink at hand, his thirst grew ever more tormenting. A black veil seemed to cloud his eyes, and at times he lost consciousness. Clearly, the terrible stranger who reaps human lives was approaching. Suddenly, bitter regret gripped Ralph's heart. He had scarcely known life. His working youth had passed in poverty, and he had struggled painfully for a piece of daily bread. And when he finally achieved honest and modest contentment, disease struck. He was tormented by suffering and an insatiable desire to penetrate the incomprehensible mysteries of human life. Now, holding the very essence of life within reach, he dies, and dies because of his own indecision. True, this goblet promises a terrible and unknown secret. But even so, is it not better than this slow, tormenting death? Suddenly, his breath was caught. A sticky mass seemed to fill his chest, rise through his throat, and suffocate him. Rings of fire swirled before his eyes, and he lost consciousness for a moment.